Prussia. You love it, you hate it, you know it. But do you know where it is? Well, it's likely you do. It's likely you think that the borders of Prussia are the borders of the Kingdom of Prussia, with which the Kingdom of Prussia gained the most renown, and with which it formed the North Prussian Confederation, and with which it formed the German Empire later. But the thing that is different here than it was in my video about Pomerania is that Prussia does not exist anymore. I didn't mention it, and I hope you all know that already, but the reason why I say Prussia does not exist anymore is because the Germans that lived in, that identified as Prussians and were in large parts Baltic Prussians that were Germanized, were deported in 1945 west of the Oder. So that identity is gone now. So when talking about Prussia, we should talk about the region of Prussia and not other regions that it later subjugated. So I already began talking about Prussia in my previous video, mentioning its subjugation by the Teutonic Order, the Teutonic Order's later expansion into Pomerania, and their subsequent defeat by Poland and Lithuania and the formation of Ducal Prussia. And you're likely also familiar with its later history, where it joined in a union with Brandenburg, and Brandenburg Prussia inherited Pomerania and also conquered Silesia and gained the Rhineland. But as I said, these are separate regions that we will ignore for now. They are not part of Prussia. Let's go back to the beginning. As with Pomerania, you can probably guess that Prussia is the land of the Prussians. And who are or were the Prussians? The Prussians were West Baltic people. Now, you are likely familiar with other Baltic peoples that exist today, which are the Lithuanians, the Latvians, the Latgalians, the Samogitians. These are all East Balts. And the West Balts do not exist anymore because they were subjugated by the Teutonic Order. The Prussians were among them. Alongside them, there were also other West Baltic peoples like the Galindians, the Scalvians, and the Sudovians. They were also subjugated by the Teutonic Order and were largely forgotten. So it's a bit sad to say, but in later historiography, there are areas of settlement, except those, namely those of the Sudovians, that Lithuania already had within its borders. So today's Podlachia and Suwalkia or Sudovia are all considered part of Prussia. So Prussia is basically the region that in the Middle Ages, before the conquest by the Teutonic Order, bordered Pomerania to the west, Lithuania to the north and east, the Baltic Sea to the north, and Poland to the south. The Teutons also held Helmnoland, which I also mentioned in my last video. In German it's called Kulmarland, which you might also be familiar with. And in fact, it was the area that the Teutonic Order held for the longest time, because from Helmnoland they expanded northward into Prussia, into the rest of Prussia, to control Prussia. And I have seen people consider Helmnoland part of Baltic Prussia. And it's important to consider that there were likely some Prussians living there because of the geographic location. We know it was inhabited very much by Poles before the Duchy of Mazovia, which it was part of, gave it to the Teutonic Order. Later it was partially Germanized. So Helmland isn't really Prussia either. Again, I guess there is some argument there. And Lubower land, Ziemia Lubawska, which is considered part of Helmland since the 13th century, was actually inhabited by Prussians before that. So therefore, part of Helmland, namely Ziemia Lubawska, Lubower land, is part of Prussia. But the rest of it is not, as I have said before. Now, let us take our attention to the eastern border. Again, we are all familiar with the Vistula border between Pomerania and Prussia from the last video. It's formed by the Vistula. On the other side lived the Pomeranians. On this side lived Prussians. On the eastern side, which, I'm not on physically, but we're talking about it from the perspective of Prussia. So, in my last video, we've established that Pomerania's eastern border is most reasonably the Nodrat River. However, I also mentioned that that river is also associated with the Prussians, perhaps even more so with the Prussians than with the Pomeranians. So the truth is that the Prussians' western limit of settlement was also the Vistula. And the Vistula spit and the Vistula fans with ending at the Vistula were fully Prussian before Pomerania took it. So the area between the Vistula and the Nodrat is, I think, both Pomeranian and Prussian, unless you're talking about the time before Pomerania took over the area. So then it would be just Prussian, but like we're talking about the area in the modern day. So if you say it's Prussia, like that the Eastern Vistula fans are Prussia, that would be correct. And if you say that's Pomerania, that would also be correct. Then to the north, we've got another interesting area, the Klaipeda/Memel region. It is currently Lithuanian, and Lithuanians did live there throughout the centuries. But as the rest of Lithuania Minor, it was firmly considered part of East Prussia and wasn't controlled by a Lithuanian state until the medieval period. And by then, the main populace of the largest city in the region, which is the eponymous Klaipeda/Memel, were Germans. And these Germans consider themselves Prussian Germans. So we can and should include it within historical Prussia, though perhaps to a smaller degree, as it's also now undeniably Lithuanian. So again, if you say it's Lithuania, nobody's going to contest it. If you say that it's Prussia, nobody's going to contest it. But let us not forget the history of German Prussia completely, even though I said that we're taking mostly the Baltic Prussians into consideration. Despite everything, it was still Prussia. It is, if you say Prussia, if you call it Prussia, that's Prussia, right? Obviously. And while Pomerania, Brandenburg, Silesia, etc. are not Prussia, West Prussia, well, is? According to Germans, yes, it is. I mean, they call it West Prussia, right? According to me, as you may remember from my Pomerania video, I don't think so. I think it's Pomerelia, and I think Pomerelia is Pomeranian. And I don't think Pomerelia lands should be considered traditionally Prussian. However, I also mentioned that Gdańsk or Danzig went through a genocide of its native Kashubian population. That population was replaced with settlers from Germany and also other regions and other ethnicities, which I might talk about in another video, so keep an eye out for that. Subscribe. Germans were, however, domineering. The Low German language quickly took over the city, and not only were they present in Gdańsk in huge amounts, but also in other so-called West Prussian cities like Toruń, Ochel, other large cities in Pomerelia and Homeland, and they were also landowners. And what identity did these people hold? Well, German, yes, but further, not Pomeranian, even though I originally the local populace would of Poles and Koszybens would say that this area is Pomeranian. The Germans who lived there did not consider this as Pomerania, but as West Prussia, and therefore they considered themselves West Prussian and therefore Prussian. So, well, I did attack the concept of West Prussia pretty heavily in that previous video. It's undeniable that a West Prussian identity did exist among the Germans living in Pomerelia and Homeland, and also Pomezania and Podlezania, but like we can all agree that these are Prussia. There is no discussion to be had. We all know they are Prussia. So did I change my mind? Can you say that Pomerelia is Prussia? No, I don't think so. I still think the land itself is firmly geographically part of Pomerania, though a significant portion of the people living there before 1945 should definitely be considered Prussians, and in some historical contexts, for example, Danzig Prussian is reasonable. But again, wouldn't put it within the borders of Prussia if I was making a map of Prussia. I would maybe stripe it or make some other pattern to say that Prussians lived there, there was a Prussian identity there, but it was more so a colony in my view than core Prussia. De facto it was a colony. Moving closer to our modern day, not only did the Germans establish West Prussia, but also, having partitioned Poland, South Prussia briefly joined the myriad of Prussian regions, encompassing Polish terrains from Warsaw to Międzyrzecz. So basically what they gained in the partitions. It lasted for 14 years, from 1773 to 1807, and was later never brought back again, so we can forget about it. It was I'm bringing it up more so as a fun fact and for diligence's sake, that South Prussia did at one point exist in German historiography. That time also saw the expansion of East Prussia into Suwałkia or Sudowia, but we can ignore that as well, as it was undeniably simply occupied Lithuanian land, and everyone has always known that. In World War II, the Nazis again expanded East Prussia, this time mostly south. More or less what was considered Eastern South Prussia in that small period of time I mentioned. But I hope it's obvious to everyone that we are not taking that into consideration in the slightest, because it's the fucking Nazis. I hope we can all agree with that, and yeah. So, to summarize, what should we consider as Prussia in the modern day when we're talking about Prussia? Basically, if you're looking at modern administrative divisions, today's Kaliningrad Oblast, Wamian-Mazurian Voivodeship, and Pomeranian Voivodeships Pomezania as the absolute core of the region. Lithuanian handled Lithuania Minor as a slightly borderland, though definitely still Prussian region. And if you really want to, formerly German-dominated cities in Pomerelia and Helmland. Though again, if you include them within Prussia, that would be rather wrong, in my opinion. Better would be to say that the people inhabiting those cities were Prussian/Prussian Germans, not that the land itself was Prussian. And again, obviously, you can refer to the Kingdom of Prussia and all its areas as Prussia in the appropriate historical context. For example, if you say that Stettin was a major Prussian shipyard in the 19th century, that would simply be correct. And if you say that Silesia and Rhineland were major industrial centers of Prussia, that would be obviously correct. But just saying that is wrong would be stupid. But just please don't go around saying that Poland gained Prussia after World War II if you're referring to the areas to the west and not the southern part of former East Prussia. Don't refer to Pomerania or Silesia or Brandenburg as Prussia geographically, as Prussia is its own region, and these are also their own separate regions that deserve recognition as such. It feels and frankly is wrong. Like, these aren't Prussia anymore. The Kingdom of Prussia doesn't exist anymore, but, well, the Prussians don't really exist anymore either, but the area of where Prussians lived is so recently not Prussian that you can definitely call it Prussia. But yeah, thank you for listening to me. Goodbye.